Hello, and welcome to the dungeon. I'm your host, Rob. Since my next video in the multi-classing tier list is going to be the Druid, and I was thinking today I haven't done any Druid subclasses in a while, I figured we'd do a subclass review. So today we're going to be talking about the Circle of Spores Druid, which I have to say is kind of a mixed bag. And I really want to stress, I love the idea of this non-necromancer type necromancer, where you're animating things, kind of more like the Last of Us style with spores and stuff like that. And I really like this idea of the cyclical nature of life and death and all that kind of stuff that they believe in, where death is just another part of the natural cycle that everything has to go through. And so I really like a lot of the philosophy behind it. I like the concept behind it. The problem is that I just don't think it's super well designed mechanically. And it's not like it's terrible. I just find that a lot of the abilities are just really mediocre. And the thing that's frustrating about it is that the one we're looking at is the one from Tasha's, but it originally came out in the Guildmaster's Guide to Ravnica. So this is actually like a rewrite of the class where they actually improved it because some of the things were like poison damage and stuff. They changed them to necrotic, which is much less likely to be resisted. And it's like you tweaked and reworked the class, and it still feels like really middle of the road. And I want to be clear, it's not like it's terrible, right? And you are still a druid. You still have the druid spell list and everything else. You've got your wild shapes. You have all that going for you. I actually think that the Circle of Spores spell list is quite strong. So I think that's pretty good. I like a couple of the features, but a lot of it, a lot of the damaging ones are just really low. And the fact that things get saving throws, I think, is really unfortunate. So I'd want to be clear about that. I really like the concept of this class. I don't want to sound like I'm just hating on it or anything like that. That's not my intention. But I also want to be honest with people about what my thoughts are. And I should be clear, I've never played this class, and the only time I saw it played, it was in a fairly low-level campaign. So I've never seen one get to I think it was 7th or so level when we ended, right? So I've never seen one even really played through mid or high levels, but I don't know that would really change my opinion necessarily. Looking at the higher level abilities, the level 10 ability can be really good if you have a good party makeup to take advantage of it. We'll talk about that more in a minute. And the level 14 ability is quite strong, but you're not getting it till 14th level. A lot of campaigns don't even go that high. And if they do, that's still fairly late into the campaign. So, especially, it's hard for me not to compare this to the Necromancer in some ways. And I know that's not really fair. They're completely different classes. But, if you wanted to play a non-Necromancer, this is probably one of your better choices. This and the Death Domain Cleric. The problem is that Necromancers have a lot of built-in scaling to their pets. You start getting proficiency bonus added to all their attacks. And if you had, say, 10 skeletons all being animated at once, and they're all getting, your proficiency bonus of, say, +4, +5, +6, whatever it is at higher levels, that turns into a lot of damage. And you don't really have anything like that with the Circle of Spores Druid. So anyways, enough preamble, let's get into the actual core abilities. So we're starting with the Circle spells. And like I said, I actually think the Circle spell list is pretty strong. So this is a definite bonus. At level 2 you get Chill Touch, which is actually a cantrip, but I like Chill Touch quite a bit. The fact that it has a decent debuff to movement speed attached to it can be pretty handy, and overall it's pretty good. Druids don't really have a lot of good damage cantrips other than Produce Flame, but this is nice to have an alternate fire damage that's very highly resisted or immune. I think it's the most common one in the game actually. So having an alternate is pretty strong. At level 3 we get Blindness, Deafness, and Gentle Repose. Blindness, Deafness I like quite a bit, mostly because it's a concentration-free debuff and it's pretty powerful. Targeting blindness or making things blind can shut down spell casting because now they can't target stuff. Can be pretty advantageous in combat as well. Although the big problem here is that it does target Constitution, and a lot of enemies tend to have pretty good Constitution bonuses. However, I like it against enemy casters quite a bit. Their Constitution tends to not be as high, and it can just completely cripple enemy spellcasters. It also scales quite nicely, so overall I think it's pretty good. Gentle Oppose, it's a mixed bag. It can be okay sometimes, but it's pretty circumstantial. Level 5 though, we get Animate Dead and Gaseous Form. Animate Dead I like a lot. I've mentioned this before, but it can be a nice boost to help your party in combat. It can also be a great scouting tool. I like to send like zombies down the hallway of the dungeon in front of me. Then if there's any spear traps or pit traps or falling stone traps or whatever else, they hit the zombies and not my party members. Or better yet, not me. That's even more important than the other party members. Just don't tell them I said that. Gaseous Form is pretty handy. I mean, I generally prefer Fly, to be honest. But Gaseous Form isn't bad either. So, Level 7, we get Blight and Confusion. Blight, I have mixed feelings on. The damage is pretty decent, but it is only single target. And that is a fairly high level spell slot for a single target spell. So, I prefer something that's like either hitting an area or just doing a lot more than just damage, especially since they get a saving throw for half. But the damage is pretty respectable. So, like I said, it's kind of a mixed bag. Confusion, on the other hand, I like quite a bit. And Confusion is one that, sometimes it turns out to be great. Things are attacking their own allies for you. Sometimes they just act normally, in which case it feels like you didn't do anything and just wasted a spell slot. However, one thing I like about Confusion is that it tends to be a lot more useful at high levels. Things like I always liked Hypnotic Pattern better, and I still do overall, but I found that there's a lot more things that become immune to like Hypnotic Pattern than Confusion. So Confusion actually stays relevant for a much longer time period. And, or at least, across general broad groups of foes, right? So there is something there that I kind of like about it. Level 9, we get Cloud Kill and Contagion. Cloud Kill I quite like, especially if you have ways of, say, forced movement or confining something and forcing them to take the damage over and over and over again. Cloud Kill really starts to shine. Contagion, it's not a bad spell. I just wish that it would spread like even more rapidly. It is a 5th level spell slot that is quite pricey, but the effects of the spell aren't bad. So again, it's one that I have mixed feelings on. Anyways, moving on to our level 2 abilities. We get Halo of Spores and Symbiotic Entity. So we'll talk about Halo of Spores first. You are surrounded by invisible necrotic spores that are harmless until you unleash them on a creature nearby. When a creature you can see moves into a space within 10 feet of you or starts its turn there, you can use your reaction to deal 1d4 necrotic damage to that target unless it succeeds on a Constitution saving throw against your spell save DC. The necrotic damage increases to 1d6 at 6th level, 1d8 at 10th level, and 1d8 at 10th and 1d10 at 14. Sorry, I just absolutely butchered that paragraph. Anyways, so my thoughts. I like that it uses your reaction because druids don't really have a lot of uses for their reaction built into the class. So, it's not like it's using like some other resource. It's a resource we already have. We probably weren't using much. I think that part's pretty good. That's the good side. The downside is it's only within 10 feet of you. That's pretty short range, and I don't know that I want to be up close to a lot of monsters on my druid. I don't have metal armor. I have a D8 for hit points, and I'm a caster. I don't know that I wanted to be up close. Now, maybe I'm using a wild shape or something, but honestly, if I wanted to be a wild shaper, I probably wouldn't have been a Circle of Spores. Let's just be honest. So short range. Number 2, D4 necrotic damage. I mean, it does scale at 6th, 10th, and 14th, but even like a D10 at 14th level, it's not a lot of damage, and they get a Constitution saving throw to avoid the damage. We just mentioned Constitution saving throw being usually a bad one to target. So, I mean, there's a very real chance that I'm going to have to be up front close to stuff, and then when it comes in range, I'm going to use my reaction to try to damage it, which is fine, but it's going to either make a saving throw, in which case it takes nothing, or it's going to fail, in which case it takes almost nothing. And that's kind of a bad feeling. However, our other level 2 ability, Symbiotic Entity, does help to make this ability a little better. So there is that. So, Symbiotic Entity. You gain the ability to channel your magic into your spores. As an action, you can expand the use of your wild shape feature to awaken these spores rather than transforming into a beast form. And you gain 4 temporary hit points for each level you have in this class. While this feature is active, you gain the following benefits. When you deal your Halo of Spores damage, roll the die a second time and add it to the total, so it doubles the damage on it. Your melee weapon attacks deal an extra 1d6 necrotic damage to any target they hit. These benefits last for 10 minutes, or until you lose all these temporary hit points, or until you use this wild shape again. So, again, you're getting extra necrotic damage to your melee attacks. This kind of encourages you to be up front and in melee, especially since you only have a 10-foot range on your Halo of Spores ability. The problem is that once these temporary hit points are gone, which is much more likely to happen if you're in melee combat, then you lose the ability. Now, you could just use another wild shape, but, I mean, you probably only have the 2, so, it's not bad. And I think that if you were to combine this with other ways of boosting your attacks per round, it can start to pay off a lot better. Like, say you multi-classed into like monk or fighter or something, and you're able to make more attacks, you're able to get that d6 in a lot more frequently, then it can start to be a pretty significant amount of damage. However, your 4 temporary hit points are per druid level, not per character level. So it's scaling with your druid, not with whatever other class you might multi-classing into. Overall, I think this ability is still really, really good, just because 4 temporary hit points per druid level is a lot of temporary hit points. So I actually think this ability is quite nice. And whether I like the damage on Halo of Spores or not, whether I like the fact that it targets Constitution or not, whether I like the range on it or not, I'm still going to be using that ability because it's there and it's not, what else am I going to do? I'm going to use Halo of Spores. So the fact that this can give me a bunch of temporary hit points and then double the damage on Halo of Spores is still pretty good. I mean, even if it was just temporary hit points, I think this is a pretty strong ability. The fact that it's making my rather lackluster Halo of Spores at least decent is, also a nice benefit. So I think Symbiotic Entity is quite good. Am I going to be meleeing a lot? I don't know. That just seems to encourage me to lose those temporary hit points faster. But either way, maybe I am. Maybe I'm going to use like Shillelagh or something a bunch. In which case, I'm adding more damage to that. It could be worse. Level 6, we get Fungal Infestation. Your spores gain the ability to infest a corpse and to animate it. If a beast or humanoid that is small or medium dies within 10 feet of you, you can use your reaction to animate it, causing it to stand up immediately with 1 hit point. The creature uses the zombie stat block in the monster manual. It remains animate for 1 hour, after which time it collapses and dies. In combat, the zombie's turn comes immediately after yours. It obeys your mental commands, and the only action it can take is the attack action, making 1 melee attack. So I find it funny that it obeys your commands, but all it can do is attack. I'm assuming it can move, maybe still. It doesn't specifically say that, but we'll assume that. You can use this feature a number of times equal to your wisdom modifier, minimum of once, and you regain all expended uses of it when you finish a long rest. So this ability actually isn't as bad as it probably sounds. Animating zombies with 1 hit point actually sounds pretty awful. But because they're zombies, they do get a saving throw whenever they take lethal damage, and they could just stand up immediately all over again. So that one hit point does have the potential to actually go a lot longer than you might think. The problem is, though, if you've ever read Zombie Stat Block in the Monster Manual, which you probably have, you'll realize that doing like tons of excessive damage makes those saving throws increasingly difficult. And because, at least if it was a normal zombie, let's say it takes 30 damage in a hit. Well, normally it has 22 hit points, so it's only taking 8 points of overflow, and it might actually make that saving throw. Your zombie has 1 hit point, meaning that it's now 29 points into overflow, and it's not making that saving throw. So I think that at lower levels, this ability is still really, really solid. It's just that as you get to higher levels and things are hitting harder, your 1 hit point zombies are even more fragile than regular zombies. So I don't know how long they're going to last. And things like AoE spells, even if you're able to get a bunch of these up, because remember, it's using a reaction. So if your party kills 4 humanoids or beasts in 1 round of combat, you're probably only able to animate 1 of those. Maybe you got 2 because maybe your reaction refreshed halfway through the round and then more died and you were able to animate a second one. But either way, it means that, at most you're going to have 5, and 1 fireball spell is probably going to take them all out. So it's not that it's a bad ability, and if you want to use them as scouts and stuff, they're still perfectly fine in that capacity. It's really only in combat where, they're starting to suffer. And like I said, at lower levels, I still think they can perform fairly decently in combat even. It's just that as you get to higher levels, they're just going to get one shot, as you would expect, and then they start proving a lot less useful. But, like I said, if you just want to use, you do have the animate dead spell on your spell list. You can use that to make some, decent ones that you want to fight with, and use these ones to, explore for traps. That's not bad. It is limited to beasts or humanoids, and once again, they have to be within 10 feet of you, which is a pretty short range. Even 20 or 30 feet would allow you to be more of a mid-range combatant and really get a lot out of this feature. 10 feet, yeah. Anyways, moving on. At level 10, we get Spreading Spores. You gain the ability to seed an area with deadly spores. As a bonus action, while your Symbiotic Entity feature is active, your temporary hit point feature, you can hurl spores up to 30 feet away, where they swirl in a 10-foot cube for 1 minute. The spores disappear early if you use this feature again, if you dismiss them as a bonus action, or if your Symbiotic Entity feature is no longer active. When a creature moves into the cube or starts its turn there, the creature takes your Halo of Spores damage, unless the creature succeeds on a Constitution saving throw against your spell save DC. A creature can take this damage no more than once per turn. While the cube of spores persists, you can't use your Halo of Spores reaction. Now, I think this ability, it's only a 10-foot cube, and they can just move out of it. So I really think this ability is pretty limited. It also doesn't say that it only targets creatures you're choosing, so I think it is probably going to hit your allies too. However, in a right party, I think this ability actually could have some use. If your party has the ability to inflict forced movement type effects on people, I think it could be somewhat useful, especially if you have you can cast on a hallway or some other place where you can deny area. The ability becomes almost useless when you're dropping it in a giant room. You're in the king's throne room of the, Orc King or whatever. Wow, your 10th level Mind Flayer King. Sure, why not? But if things can just move around and avoid it, it's not particularly great. But if you have, say, a warlock in your party and they have a repelling blast or something, and they can keep pushing this thing back into the Circle of Spores area, maybe you have a wall of force, and a wizard drops a wall of force, and then you or vice versa, you use your Circle of Spores and he drops a wall of force around it, and now things are just forced to take the damage over and over and over again. It can start to be pretty good in those circumstances. But this is requiring other teammates to help you It's a level 10 ability. You know, are you really going to like try to plan the entire party around it? I don't know. But forced movement is a lot more common these days than it used to be. And so it doesn't necessarily require a lot of planning. A lot of forced movement abilities are really good on their own. So you might have allies who are planning on taking those abilities anyway, and then they can combine them with this, which isn't actually too bad. So I think that it's not necessarily a bad ability. I wish that it did things like just like maybe if a humanoid or beast died inside the area, it would automatically be inflicted with your zombie effect. I think that would actually make the ability a lot stronger. You know, but whatever. Moving on to your final ability, level 14, Fungal Body. The fungal spores in your body alter you. You can't be blinded, deafened, frightened, or poisoned. And any critical hit against you counts as a normal hit instead, unless you are incapacitated. This is actually a really solid ability. A lot of classes get some like stronger defensive abilities around like 10th to 14th level. Yours is kind of on the more on the end of that. But overall, it is a really good ability. All those conditions, blinded, deafened, frightened, and poisoned, are really annoying. And critical hits, just counting as normal hits, is actually really nice too. A lot of things start to hit really hard by 14th level. So, you know, a lot of times you are only going down if you have like a bad run of luck where you get like a crit or maybe even 2 crits in the same round of combat. The fact that these are just going to be treated as normal is actually pretty good. My big problem with it is that it is coming on pretty late. You're 14th level already. You know, but it's not a bad ability by any means, and certainly stronger than what some classes get. So I actually think that it's pretty good for that level. So my final thoughts on the class. As I've mentioned, I think thematically this subclass is really, really cool. I really, really want to like it. This falls into that like wild magic sorcerer type category for me, where I like the concept, I like the ideas, I liked what they were doing. It's just when you look at the finished product, you really have one ability that's a complete standout, in my opinion. That ability is great. We've already talked about it. You know, a bunch of temporary hit points, scales really nicely, and then also ups the damage on my other ability. That one's really solid. It's just, and then your level 14 ability, your defensive ability, again, very, very solid. It's just when I look at the other ones, so many, like the damage is low. They all allow saving throws. It's Constitution saving throws. Yes, it scales with your spell save DC, which at least is something, but in general, the damage is quite low. Even doubling the damage, while nice, you know, I don't know that it's huge. You do have a really nice spell list, though, I think. So it's not like it's a terrible class. I just think that it's got some really good features and some really mediocre features, or even subpar features, which overall just kind of makes it a steady C grade, I guess, is where I would rank it. I don't think that it's by any means the worst class or subclass in the game. Not even close. It's way better than some. It's just, I think the potential is even stronger. So those are my thoughts. Feel free to like, subscribe, ring the bell for notifications, and of course, leave me your comments in the comment section. I'm really curious what people think. Maybe you've played one. And this is one of the things, right? I've never played this subclass, like I said. I've never seen one played by anyone else too high level, or even like really beyond mid-level or low mid-level, let's call it, you know? So I could be completely off base here, but it really doesn't feel that way to me. I said, it's one that I really want to like, and I just find myself feeling like it's kind of a mixed bag and kind of mediocre overall. I think that there's some really great features, some really not so great features, and I feel like it's trying to like kind of push you into this like close range fighting type of druid, but you still by default have one attack around. You don't really have, I mean, maybe you could pick up like Booming Blade or Green Flame Blade, and then combined with your like bonus necrotic damage, the fact that you only have one attack around isn't so bad. You could I just bit my tongue. You can still hit fairly hard. I think that there could be some interesting multi-class potential, right? Like I said, like monk or fighter, or somebody who can get a lot of attacks, and then you're able to apply that D6 over and over and over again. I think there's some potential there, but overall, I just think that it's a fairly mediocre subclass, and I don't like to say that about it. I know this isn't exactly my most positive, enthusiastic review ever, but I also don't want to lie to people and say like, "Oh, this is like the greatest subclass ever," and then you play it and you're like, my Halo of Spores almost never does any damage, and when it does, I just, oh, it's a 1 or 2 or whatever, right? And I just don't want to give you like the wrong impression of it. I just, overall, I just think it's really kind of a mixed bag. Like I said, there are some really good subclass features. There's some really weak ones, and so I think it just settles into the middle overall, and that's not necessarily bad. I just really like the concept of it, and so I think I just wanted it to be better. Like I said, it really reminds me of the wild magic sorcerer in that regard. Not in the way it's played, not in the spell list or anything like that. Just in that it's this really cool theme and this neat idea that I feel like they just didn't quite get it right when they tried to put it into play mechanically. So those are my thoughts. Anyways, thank you for watching, and I will see you next time. Bye.